To do this, you can be a writer, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a leader of one sort or another. You can speak to how your work brings purpose or how purpose defines your work. Welcome to Your Creative Mind. This show is all about tapping into your creativity and using it to build a life you love. You'll hear practical tools, inspiring stories, and conversations with artists, writers, innovators, and changemakers who are doing the work, so you can too. Let's spark your imagination, focus your energy, and create with purpose. Ready? Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the Your Creative Mind podcast. I'm your host, Izolda. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And if you have been listening, you might remember that a couple of months ago, I did an episode on how to pitch yourself to podcasts so the hosts and producers can't wait to have you. In the episode, I said your pitch should be timely because podcast hosts want what's relevant right now, but also, in a way, evergreen because podcasts often schedule weeks and even months in advance. In fact, for example, I do that all the time. I've had people who did their interview back in January and their episodes are going live in August. These are the kinds of things that happen because we often schedule pretty far in advance. So I wanted to explore that notion of being both timely and evergreen a little bit more today. So how do you do it? How do you pitch something that's both timely and evergreen? Well, I came up with 10 possible themes for you to think about in this episode. These are all relevant and timely, yet they're also evergreen. In other words, they can apply today, they can apply to yesterday, and they can apply to tomorrow. And that's something that I want to ask you to think about because the key here is to think about how you can talk about these themes in a way that's particular to who you are and what you do. In other words, if you're an author, how would you approach any or all of the themes that I'm about to talk about to bring your fresh and unique perspective to a podcast you're pitching? If you're a musician, how would you do it? If you're an architect, how would you do it? How would you take these themes and make them relevant to what you're doing today and, frankly, what you're going to be doing 6 months from now? The question to ask yourself is, what sets you apart on these important, timely, as I said, yet evergreen subjects? And that means that I want to explore all of them and see how you might do just that. So here's the first one: mental health and emotional resilience. A lot of podcast hosts are looking for content that helps their audience deal with stress, burnout, and emotional overload. Certainly, right now, we're all stressed, burnt out, and emotionally overloaded, or at least a lot of us are. So here's a way that you might share something that has to do with what you're doing as a way of addressing burnout or emotional overload. You might share a technique like the 4-7-8 breathing method that regulates stress. As an example, if you're a writer, you might go, okay, in order to calm myself so that I can write from a non-stressed out place, this is a technique that I use. That's a way of doing it. You can talk about how journaling or narrative storytelling helps process anxiety. You can offer a framework like window of tolerance from trauma psychology and explain it in practical terms how it relates to you as a writer. You can talk about the science behind habits that build resilience over time, such as social connections, creative practices, or even just sleep. So you see, this is a great space for wellness authors, mindset coaches, or even fiction writers whose work explores emotional growth to come in and go, okay, these are the ways that I can talk about some of these subjects that are timely and relevant right now because so many of us are emotionally overloaded or stressed out. But this is how it relates to me as an artist or as an author or as a coach or anything else that you're doing, but make it relevant through your funnel, through your filter. Another one you can talk about is effective communication. You know, it's funny. I was an English major, and for a long time, I kind of went, okay, what do I do with an English major? But there are so many things that I can do. But one of the things is communication. I was not a communication major. I was an English major, but it taught me a lot about analysis. It taught me a lot about observation. And I often had to do public speaking, for example, when I was doing any sort of a presentation for my English classes. And I also took a lot of theater and drama classes. So literary criticism, dramatic criticism, often we were doing things that required that building of communication skills. So as an English major, you might go, okay, that's interesting, but how would you approach it as an author, which is traditionally a more solitary thing? Well, there are a lot of authors who work in tandem. In fact, I just watched a preview of the show And Just Like That, which is the continuation of Sex and the City. And Carrie Bradshaw, played by Sarah Jessica Parker, I'm sure you know this, but anyway, so she meets another writer who I guess lives in the first floor of her building or something. I don't even actually know that part, but they say one of her friends goes, oh, and this is in the trailer, so this episode's probably already run, but in the trailer, her friend goes, ooh, I noticed that there was a chemistry there between the two of you, and Carrie Bradshaw replies, no, he's just a writing partner. And in other words, they might be collaborating or they might be writing at the same time in the same place. I do, for example, Saturday morning writing sprints where a bunch of writers gather and we write essentially from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. No, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Sorry, my brain. Eastern Daylight Time right now on Zoom. We just get together, we do a quick check-in, and then we do at least 2 20-minute writing sessions just to get the blood flowing. And that communication of the checking in and sort of acknowledging each other as beings on this planet at the same time as we're about to write is another way that we build those communication skills. So that's a way that you could do it. And you could also look at the number of different industries communication spans, right? There's leadership, there's relationships, education, the arts. There are so many different ways. We all need to have good communication skills that, regardless of what you do, you probably have to communicate. So you can, for example, talk about nonviolent communication or active listening techniques as they relate to what you do. You can explain how communication is going to be different across digital platforms and how to adapt how you communicate accordingly, right? Zoom versus an audio only or a live presentation or anything like that, you're going to want to talk about all of that. You could talk about vocal tools and you could talk about body language. You can talk about pacing. So those are the kinds of things that might make you a more effective speaker, a more engaging speaker. You can share examples of when communication breaks down and how to fix those breakdowns so that you get back to that almost effortless give and take and collaborative facets of communication. But you also want to think about your own lens, right? Do you work with teams? Do you teach? Do you perform? Your perspective is going to make this something that's actionable for people who are in the same boat, but maybe just flowing behind you on the river a little bit. Another thing that you can talk about is human connection and belonging. And this is where you can address community building, identity, and empathy. Particularly if you're a writer. This is one of those things, again, it's a solitary pursuit oftentimes. I have just taken on being the president of the tri-state New York, New Jersey, Connecticut chapter of the Sisters in Crime, crime fiction writers chapter of the National Sisters in Crime organization. And I'm using a lot of my communication skills to build sort of the team so that we, the board of directors of the chapter, because I think with the exception of one person, we're all new, and it's a 2-year term. And that's one of the things that I'm doing is utilizing my communication skills, but also staying very curious about their thoughts, about their ideas, because I want to not just be a president who says, this is what we're going to do. I want to build a real community with the board and have that trickle over and out to the greater membership of the chapter. This is not to say that the previous board didn't do a great job. They absolutely did. They did a terrific job of leading the chapter, but now it's a new board and we have to come up with a sort of our own unique way of doing it. So, as writers, again, often solitary, we are being asked as volunteers for this board to do it a little differently now, to be more communicative, more collaborative than we might otherwise be. And this is the thing that we need to do in order to keep the chapter thriving and growing. But we also need to get some definitions here. What does it mean to feel safe to express yourself in these group settings? And how do we foster it? Those are things, if you're a writer, or if you're an architect, or if you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, doesn't matter. If you work with other people at all, you're going to need to figure out a way to be safe, to speak and express yourself, but also to create a sense of safety for other people to express themselves. And you can talk about that, again, as it relates to what you do and how you do it. You can explore how art or music or storytelling builds bridges between people. That's another theme that you can talk about. And for me, music, of course, always does, because not only do I love to sing, but I love to get other people involved in singing. And I teach work in harmony workshops when I go into corporations, and I teach the people who work at these organizations how to sing together so that they build teams. But I also love teaching Girl Scouts and Brownies and fourth graders and second graders and kindergartners to sing together, because it does build that incredible sense of community and connection. You can also look at tools like empathy mapping for that deeper connection. You can discuss how belonging is going to make an impact on motivation and performance, and how to create inclusive environments. And that's a really big deal. How do we make it so that whatever it is you're pitching, whatever it is you're talking about on a podcast is inclusive? As an example, for me, I like to sing in lots of different languages, and I'm always looking for new languages to sing in, but also inviting people up to sing in their language, right? So I used to do this open mic night at Dundalk Community College, or Baltimore Community College, the Dundalk campus. They had me out there every month for years. We would do a student open mic. And one of the things that we would do is foster a sense of community so that the students all felt like they could get up and sing in their language. And we had people singing in Hindi, and we had people singing in Swahili, and we had people singing in Japanese and Arabic and Farsi and Hebrew and Spanish and all sorts of languages to highlight their culture and their language so that we all could be enriched by the experience of having done that. And it is phenomenal to have that chance to learn about a culture through its music is one of the most amazing things. And that brings me, of course, to Alan Lomax, who was an ethnomusicologist, and I've talked about him on this show before. He traveled the world recording music, whether it was just vocal or instrumental and vocal, from all over the world, and put it out as his daughter actually put it out as a searchable database. So if you want to hear singing from the Dominican Republic, or singing from Kenya, or singing from Tasmania, you can by searching that database. And that also brings me to Josh Ragosin, who's going to be on the show hopefully very soon, who used to he was the sound engineer for the Tiny Desk concerts at NPR, and he's gone off on his own, and he's doing a project where he's going around and recording musicians all over the world, but he's doing it in such a way. Alan Lomax had not the greatest audio recording equipment when he was out there, because we didn't have great audio recording equipment when he was out there. But Josh Ragosin has incredible audio recording equipment, and he is going to be traveling the world, and is already traveling the world, recording musicians in their homes, as in not maybe necessarily where they live, but in their home country, in spaces that are comfortable for them, with incredible recording equipment, so that he can bring that music out to the world. How incredible is that? How amazing is it to have that ability to create that kind of connection among different people from different parts of the world? And I'm really excited to talk to him and bring that episode to you when it comes out, because I cannot think of a greater way to connect humans than to do that. So if you're a creative or an educator or a facilitator of some sort, you can bring a fresh voice here, especially if your work in any way brings people together. Another one that you can look at is purpose and meaning. As more people than ever reevaluated their work during COVID, this has become increasingly important. You might talk about ikigai, and when I talk about ikigai, and if you're a longtime listener of this show, you've heard me talk about ikigai. It is a Japanese concept where you sit at the center of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And that is, if you can find that intersection of those four things, that's your life purpose. So you can talk about that. You can talk about values-based goal setting for teams or for individual people. You can break down how someone might realign at a job that feels stagnant, really. And how could they realign their stagnant feeling with the larger mission of their own life and their own goals? You might discuss how different generations view meaningful work and why that matters, because Gen Xers are going to be very different than Gen Zers, that are going to be different than Gen Alpha, and certainly different than the boomers. So why does it matter? And if you work within that framework, you've got a really unique perspective that is going to be timely and relevant from now until time immemorial, because we're going to have new generations at all times. And you don't have to be a career coach to do this. You can be a writer, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a leader of one sort or another. You can speak to how your work brings purpose, or how purpose defines your work. And that is a beautiful way to look at it. Another one that you might want to think about is time, focus, and attention. In other words, where you put your time, where you put your focus, and where you put your attention. Because everyone wants more focus and less overwhelm. And some of the things that you can talk about through your lens, always through your lens, is Pomodoro technique, for example, time boxing. You can talk about multitasking versus deep work, right? I've always thought of myself as a great multitasker, but no, I've just been switching microtask to microtask. And I've gotten much better at going into the depth of work that I need to do, rather than trying to do too many things at once. I no longer have to keep pulling myself out of things and go, okay, where was I? And then go back in and find things. I now give myself 2 hours to work on X, and then I'm going to have 2 hours to work on Y, and I don't dip back and forth. I do X and then I move to Y. You can talk about how a physical movement like walking or stretching or yoga can really improve your focus. And I talk about that all the time, because I have a daily yoga practice and have been practicing yoga for 27 years now. But it ebbs and flows, and I recently just reconnected with my practice. In other words, I have been doing daily practice, but it's been around 10, 15 minutes a day, and I'm rededicating to getting back to a 45-minute to a 60-minute practice a day. Because even though it takes that hour of the day out of my day, it gives me so much more feeling of time and feeling of expansion, because my focus and my ability to concentrate really improves. So I'm not fluttering around. Instead, I'm able to focus in. And you can also look at how, for example, timers might help. Setting timers or taking email breaks. I've talked about this before. I use something that is an extension on my Chrome that basically doesn't allow me to get onto social, even though I've left most social kind of behind. But I use that in order to stay focused. And it's just a little reminder. It doesn't let me in. I can get around it, of course. I can go in and I can turn off the little thing that says, nope, you can't use social right now. But just having that extra little step in place often gets me right back to where I need and want to be. You can Number 6 in this is leadership and institutions. And right now, the societal trust is kind of low. So you might want to talk about the traits of trustworthy leaders, about transparency, about empathy, which is so important, about following through on what you said you were going to do. All of these things, depending on, again, through your lens, how could you talk about it? You could share an example of when trust was lost and how it was or wasn't rebuilt. You can talk about strategies for decision making in an ethical framework, and you can explore how to cultivate trust in virtual teams or hybrid teams. How do you do it? Again, through your lens, because if your work addresses culture or leadership or ethics or organizational health, you can really have an impact in this space and pitch to podcasts accordingly. Another thing you can talk about, and I love this because I have a thing that I say is always be learning. It's sort of a take on the Glenn Ross, always be closing. But for me, it's always be learning, always be curious. And so how do we become lifelong learners? How do we learn how to adapt? This, you can describe this as the age of AI. Even saying that makes me think of the Terminator and makes me have a little shudder. But everyone is being asked to rethink or to build these skills, and some angles that you might talk about are: how would you maintain a growth mindset and apply it beyond school? Right. If you're talking about even talking to a younger audience or talking about it on a podcast that skews a little bit younger than I am, being as old as I am, you can break down how to design your own learning plan based on your passions. If you're an educator of one sort or another, you can talk about how to overcome the fear of starting something new, which is big. Starting something new, learning new things is one of the best things that you can do for brain health, for example. They've done studies on this. You keep your brain healthier when you keep learning, when you keep being curious, when you build new neural pathways. They used to think the brain was sort of stagnant. You have what you had and that was it. And now they've realized it keeps growing and improving as long as you keep learning. So you can talk about all of these different things. You can talk about learning a new language or a new musical instrument or a new way of writing or coding or anything like that. You can offer ideas about how to microlearn. So you can do short bursts of learning or a daily practice. I did an art project a day for a year. I had to do a painting a day. That really stretched my skills. And the same thing with when I was writing a micro short story every day for a year. That really helped my skills. And I think it really did. It flexed my brain's muscles a lot. And I love that. I love that as a thing that I can talk about. And I can talk about that and relay it to just about any relate it to just about any podcast. If we're talking about building new skills and I'm for some reason talking to an engineering podcast, I can talk about building new engineering skills or programming skills or music skills or writing skills or science education skills or public speaking skills. Those are the kinds of things that I can talk about within that framework. You have to think for yourself about, from your framework, how could you talk about these themes and subjects? The next thing is sustainability and stewardship. And sustainability doesn't have to be limited to climate. It can mean energy, it can mean time, it can mean systems. You can talk about, for example, small wins as sustainability. How can a team reduce waste or create long-term change? You can talk about reuse, reduce, rethink, recycle, repurpose. Yes, how can you do that in unexpected contexts, whether it's business systems or a creative process? You can explore differences between sustainable practices and performative ones. That's a big one. You can describe regenerative practices in art, in agriculture, or even in community organizing. You know, what's interesting to me about art, one of the things that I love is seeing gardens. So there are people out there who do butterfly gardens and pollinator gardens. And some of these practices, you can create something very, very beautiful that is also a self-sustaining mechanism, if you will, for keeping the food process going, for keeping the pollinators pollinating, all of that. But also I've seen soil as art. And in fact, when I used to work at NASA, that was one of the things that I was tasked with, was for the soil science education homepage, which was eventually used by over 100 countries to teach and learn about soil for students of all ages. I was on the lookout for soil as art. And you might think, well, what is soil as art? Well, you can look at African mudcloth. You can look at soil pigment for painting, or you can look at china or sculptures or sand paintings, so many different, or makeup, cleansers, a lot of things. Pepto-Bismol, although that's not science as art as much as it's science as medicine, but Pepto-Bismol, or actually kaopectate is the one that I remember as kaolinite clay. And that's another one of those processes where if you're an environmental educator and you want to talk about some of these things and how they relate across systems and across subjects, you can do that. And you can pitch from those spaces with a lot of depth. The next thing is authenticity and integrity. And we talk about authenticity all the time, and it's become kind of a buzzword, but being real, being authentic, that's a big, huge deal. And you can share a checklist or a filter to assess whether your work or content aligns with your core values. That's huge, regardless of what you do. Are you doing work that aligns with who you are? You can offer ideas on how to make challenging integrity-based decisions. You can talk about the difference between transparency and oversharing, especially on social media. You can explore branding or storytelling from that be real, be authentic first standpoint. So if you work in personal branding or marketing or ethics or leadership, there's a lot of material there that you can use for a pitch. And last but not least, my favorite, creativity and problem solving. So creativity, of course, as you know, if you listen to the show at all, is not just for artists. It's for innovators and problem solvers in every field. You could share about how constraint-based thinking, limited time or resources is going to spark new solutions. You can break down lateral thinking techniques and mind mapping techniques that allow you to look at the problems you need to solve from new and innovative and creative ways. You can introduce warm-ups, creative warm-ups that people can do in under 5 minutes that will get them focused and motivated and energized and ready to go. And my favorite is you can talk about the role of curiosity and how to activate it and cultivate it across lots of disciplines. If you're curious, most things end up being possible. And so if you're a creative pro or an educator or a consultant or a tech innovator, and you can talk about creative thinking and you can talk about curiosity through the lens of what you do, you're golden to just about any podcast. So these are the kinds of things that you want to look at. And I want to ask you, which ones felt aligned with the core of what you're doing, of your message? Because what you want to do is take some or all or one of these, and you want to personalize them to who you are and to what you do. So what tools do you use that could help other people? What kinds of questions do your clients, do your readers, do your customers, do your bosses constantly ask you? And how can you take those and turn those around and use them to transform, or rather form, your pitch, so that when you try to go to get on a podcast, you're talking about it through your experience? And what have you learned throughout your career, throughout what you're doing, that's helpful and shareable, that will bring a lot of value, not just to the podcast host, but more importantly, I'm tired, you can tell, because my brain is not wanting to form words, but more importantly, to the podcast's audience, because that's how you're going to pitch something that's both timely and evergreen. You're going to ground it in a theme that matters to a wide audience and then shape it through your unique lens and your expertise. I'd love to hear from you if you decide to try any of these, because it's crucial to all of us to get our message out there. And if you want to be on podcasts, they're not the same as news organizations a lot of the time. They do build out 2, 3, 6 months out. And so what is timely now might not be timely then. So if you do that more evergreen yet timely set of pitches, it'll be really helpful. Another thing to think about, and this is the last thing I'll say on this before I go off on my merry way, is that you want to be aware of your own process. For example, if you're pitching podcasts because you've got a new book coming out, and I'm talking a lot about writing, but there it is. Well, if the book is coming out next Tuesday, it's too late, right? You don't want to pitch a podcast that with this book as the sort of focal point for a Tuesday release date when the podcaster won't be able to get you on until 6 months from now. So if you envision a book that's going to be coming out at 8 months from now, that's when you pitch those podcasts just in case. And some podcasters will work with you. For example, I will work with my guests if they have a particular book or a particular project or a particular product coming out at a certain time, and they would really like the podcast to sort of go out right around then. I'll work with them if I can, if there isn't something else already booked at that time. Some podcasters are able to be flexible on that and some are not. So you want to be sure that you have the ability to sort of think a little bit farther in advance so that you can have that timing down for your own product and service, so that, because a lot of podcasters will let you talk about it. They're like, yeah, sure, come on, and I'll let you. I certainly do. If somebody has a book or a play or a show coming out or a new product or service that aligns with my show's mission, listen to a previous episode on how to pitch podcasts if you want to know more about that. But if they have that and it's going to be coming out in October, I'm happy to go, yeah, sure, I will hold your episode until October. If it's coming out October 15th, I might put it out on October 14th or October 10th or something like that, the closest Monday. That's one of the things that I can do to help my guests out, because if they come on the show and they provide value to my audience, to you who are listening, then that's fabulous. And I have what I need in order for my audience, for you who are listening, to go, oh, this was valuable to me. But at the same time, they're going to come on and they're going to talk about something that they're doing, which I think is super cool. So I will schedule it that way with them to make sure that they have what they need, right? It's a symbiotic, collaborative relationship. So if you want to sort of thread that needle, figure out your timing and pitch podcasts accordingly through those timely yet evergreen subjects that are, again, through the lens of your unique perspective and what you are doing. All right. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This was super fun to explore. I'm loving it. Yeah. And I'm going to be doing some stuff over the next few months. It's going to be even more diving deep into podcasting and diving deep into writing processes, everything from self-transformation to how to take a book from soup to nuts, from a kernel of an idea to a published version. It's going to be an interesting next 6 months. It's going to be super fun. All right. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I think I already said that. You can tell I'm tired. This is Izolda Trachtenberg for the Your Creative Mind podcast, reminding you, as always, to be curious, to be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Izolda Trachtenberg and is copyright 2025. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope.